Hello, Ozzy.
Hello, Alex.
How are you?
I am well.
What is the news of today and how was your day?
High and low and frustrating and exhilarating. I don't know, like I was talking to one colleague about a Weinstein story, had a councilman's cell phone number in my phone for years that I shared with someone else that turned out to be wrong.
Oh.
And then was talking to like a dude with a tatted up face who was like talking to me about like stick up artists who are robbing drug dealers and how he's putting on a show next week.
Was it a SoundCloud rapper?
No, it's like a dude. It's an actor who had a former life as like a Latin king, although he says he's an active Latin king. And then
So they weren't like Instagram influencer face
no.
tattoos.
So it was weird, like the day, like the last like half hour of my day, or like the last hour, which is why I was late getting here, was just like a snippet of like how weird an actual day can be. One of my colleagues is working on the Weinstein coverage, Harvey Weinstein, and I was talking to her about some of the reporting that was in Ronan Farrow's book.
Oh.
That if you didn't read it, and it's hard because some people don't always have time to do it. It's like there's some nuggets of information in there that are kind of amazing, including a quote from Harvey Weinstein where he says something like maniacal that you would expect from like a movie villain. And then from there, I had another conversation with an editor who asked me for something routine like, do you have a councilman's cell phone number? And I thought I had it, and it turns out it was like a campaign manager of his from like years earlier. And then I had also been talking to an actor who's putting on a show about formerly incarcerated individuals who are going to stand up and tell their story like moth style next week. And it's like, when you think about the entertainment industry borrowing so much authenticity, like ripped from the headlines, and here are like 4 people who actually spent time in jail who are going to tell their story, and they're like encroaching on the entertainment landscape. It's like that segment of my day is like mind-blowing if you think about it.
I have my dad come, who was in jail. I have my dad come all the time when I do events, and I'm like, tell your jail stories. And he's more than happy to do it.
Huh.
He has a lot to say. You know, he talked to me when I had it casually offhanded when I was like, Epstein didn't kill himself, or I was on FAQ with Pervades.
We didn't land on the moon.
Right.
know?
And he said, oh, of course he didn't kill himself because he was at MCC. And what he told me was basically that, well, one, it was a state-of-the-art prison when it opened, so that was interesting for me to see,
right.
Now that they're trying to build a bunch of new state-of-the-art jails around the city to replace Rikers. It's interesting that MCC was already one, but
it had once been beautiful, like young and beautiful,
right.
like all of us.
And he put it in my head. What I kind of realized, and I remember talking to a couple people about this, was that it doesn't have to be this crazy conspiracy that he was allowed to kill himself, or that because he was like, because even like the lowest level mob guy could get someone killed in there at the time of even when it was a fancy jail.
Right.
Is kind of what he was implying. But he, when I do storytelling events and stuff, I always ask him if he wants to. And he has these really interesting, it's this old, like super workout fitness Jewish tough guy who grew up on
You
Avenue
make it
J.
sound like that's a common category.
I feel like it is.
I just want you to know it is not. not the part of like New York Jewish family that I have.
Right. Well, he's just like, grew up on Avenue J. His brother was a boxer. His mom worked for the MTA, single old Jewish lady from Poland. Yeah, he comes to all these storytelling events, and he really likes it because I think that there's a showmanship in having to be in prison in the first place. Huh. And if you can translate that or be comfortable enough, you can kind of get a different life, and you can interact with people who never before would have interacted really with you or would have been uncomfortable with you as a felon. And now they're doing moth style reading events, and it's very interesting for people to be able to communicate with that. He did a story once where he was talking about being in Greenwich Village and being a drug dealer in the 70s, and this friend of mine, his sister, goes, what was the female representation like in drug dealing in the 70s in New York? And he just goes, because there's this huge generation gap, he goes, no, women, no, they break. And then ever since then, I know, and he goes, they get you in a room, they talk about your wrinkles in 10 years and your babies, you're going to break. And him and I have been having the argument over whether
he's saying like law enforcement.
Yeah, they say they get women to break by saying like in 10 years, if you go do a 10-year bit, but guys apparently don't care about that or something. And him and I have ever since that day been having the same argument of, do you think I would break? And finally he just went, no, I don't think you would break, but he does think I would break. But him and I just have this argument every time we hang out now, except we were sitting Shiva recently for his wife's father. We didn't have the argument at that time because it was inappropriate.
I just want to tell you, like your run-of-the-mill everyday story, like life stories, are better than most people's like best Hollywood screenplay adaptation. You know.
Well, thank you. I mean, they're not made up, but if I learn anything from him, they're a little exaggerated.
But what is it that you think your dad likes about telling his story?
He always said he just loved being a drug dealer. He felt like he was good at it. He was good at it. He could make connections. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought that marijuana was like a political issue because he was in jail and my parents he wanted me to think he was like a good
freedom
guy.
Fighter.
Right. But I think he likes these stories about, I had to get this in the plane and then I had to fly the plane here and then there was a guy that held me up and that was a crazy time. He loves those. It's
like a cowboy adventure story.
It's a cowboy adventure story every time.
So for him to tell that story in public, it sounds like he's not vulnerable. He doesn't risk anything.
Right.
He's the good heroic guy that we all want to be on our best days, right? Like if we could be.
Yeah. I mean, there's some prison stories where he's not the hero, and it takes a minute for him to get there, but he's this natural born, there's a lot to him that's a natural born hustler. So you have to adjust to be who you need to be to get what you need to get. I think that naturally lends itself to storytelling.
It's funny, like the way that I got into journalism was by having this like I turned a switch on in my brain, trying to act like the way that your dad lived.
Right.
I've
spent my life trying to act like the way my dad lived, and I can only do like a cute interpretation.
Well, like I never once got anything close to like what he has experienced for years, but I definitely remember I had never wanted to do anything related to journalism until after college. And after September 11th, I was like, I have an English degree. I'm living in New York City. Like, I can't do anything other than type. And I applied for a job at the Queens Tribune. And I walked in, and I was waiting to get called in for the interview. And I remember telling myself, like, I'd called out sick to my first day at a restaurant in order to go do this interview. I remember telling myself, like, if I don't make this, it's back to the kitchen.
Like journalism, I don't care. Or if I don't make this, I'm just going to be washing dishes for the rest of my life.
No, see, like if it would have been that stark, I don't think it would have felt as real. Like it, I actually thought of something more terrifying, which may not even sound as bad as I'm making it, but like the whole like make or break, that to me never sounded real. It was, I either get it now, like land this interview, or I have to go this other route that I was planning on, which I thought would take years. And the idea of waiting 7 years, you come to it as an old man. Like, I thought that was actually worse, to get the thing that you really want when you're too old to really appreciate it. I thought that was, like, horrible. Because if you try and you don't get something, you can at least walk away saying, I tried. I'm never going to play for the Yankees. But damn it, like, I had my best tryout. So what? Like, I ran the hardest I ever ran in high school. I'm not going to get a gold medal at the Olympics, but at least I like tried. The idea of finally getting what you want, but you're too broken or too like, that's even, to me, that's even worse. So I'm sitting in this like waiting area about to go into this interview, and I tell myself like I remember thinking I'm going to give myself permission to be like the Hollywood version of myself.
Right.
When I think of that smart thing to say, but I never say it because I'm embarrassed, or if I was like, all right, I'm going to be the version I want to be, like if I'm watching a movie. And I went into this interview and like I had a writing test and it sort of flopped or whatever. But I remember at one point I was sitting down with this editor And she said, why do you want to be a journalist? It's hard work. It's not a lot of pay. And as she was she'd asked the question, but was giving a little bit, couple of sentences to support her, like, why do you really want this question? I jumped in and go, I know I want to be a journalist, but finish your question.
Oh, that's good. So you were like, it's like that. I don't want to say gangster because not only gangsters employed it, they got it from somewhere. It's this like working class, like I'm going to see it, I'm going to take it. You know, like this very young American kind of young urban American vibe.
That's a very nice way to put it. The other way is that kid has a moxie.
Right.
Which is the exact word.
Right.
And like, I pretended to be a lot more confident and skilled than I actually was. And like, I got hired like the next day.
Did they say like, you got it, kid, right away? Or
the whole test to get in was like really weird. I had a meeting with the publisher and I told him I thought he was conflicted out of writing about politics because he was best friends with a congressman, which he wrote about in his column, which is how I knew about it. Then I was given a press release and told, write a story in 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was. And I kept on typing a sentence and deleting it, writing again, deleting it. And I've never written a story before. And then I didn't even realize, but there was actually 2 pages of the press release. And on the second page is where all the information is, like where is the cleanup happening? How much does it cost? And who's providing the money? The first page is all like the dumb quotes that don't tell you anything. And at one point, as I'm trying to type and figure this thing out, the publisher walked over and unplugged the monitor to my computer. And he was doing it as like a playful joke, like, deal with a problem.
right.
So I plug it in, and then a guy sitting next to me thinks I'm already hired and introduces himself because he wants to be a good colleague. And I tell him I say, hi, my name is Azi, but my name is Mud if I don't finish, so leave me alone. Because I can only think of like dumb cliches at this point.
But that's also, so you're like going,
I'm just like a wise guy.
right. Blazing guns in the air.
Yeah.
Look at me,
My
Mom.
name is Mud.
Right.
You know, I know I want to be a journalist. I'm just
It's
coming.
the 1920s.
Exactly. And then at one point, this editor walks over and introduces himself to me, and I'm like, great, now I have to come up with another line. But he tells me my time is up, and I'm like, I have to stop. And I have one sentence written on my computer screen. And this was in 2003, and the process that I was supposed to do was save the file onto a hard disk, put that hard disk along with whatever written notes I have into a manila folder, secure it all with a paperclip, and literally hand it to my editor so she can see my notes and my story.
Like a disc?
Yes, like a disc. Yes.
Like a square disc?
Yeah. So like a hard.
I should have had one of those.
So one day we'll unearth it with
Yeah.
the dinosaur bone. So I have to walk back into this room, to the same person who I was like, I don't think I want to be a journalist, like with all that confidence. And I now have to hand that same person a manila folder with a floppy disk that has literally one sentence on it. So of course I'm still in this like overconfident, oversharing, fuck it all mood. And I just give it to her and I go, don't bother opening it. I failed.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, burn it down. Like, what the hell?
Right.
I mean, it's not going to be a sequel. And she goes, no, you passed. The first lesson was that you handed it in on time. She said, I can teach you everything about journalism. The one thing I can't teach you is how to be curious. And if you can bring that, I can teach you everything else. And she had thought of the newsroom, especially at this one, as like a learning place, which helped explain like the low pay, like you give us sweat equity, we'll train you, and then you go on to wherever you want to go after that. I just remember thinking like no one hires someone like that. It can't be like that. This is ridiculous. I handed in one cent. Like I didn't believe it could actually work.
Movies do get it from somewhere.
Well, but it's weird though. Like,
and people watch movies.
Yeah, but like I had. In a very short amount of time, I desperately wanted to do this work because I thought you name and print, you tell the truth, you don't take sides, you become like a detective, and you get to write. Like I thought it was all the best things in the world, and you get paid for it. There's no way that like it works out for the guy that hands in one sentence,
right?
After showing up with so much attitude. So she says, we'll call you tonight at 5 o'clock with an answer. 5 o'clock comes and goes, 6, 7 o'clock. I'm at home in my dad's apartment, and I'm just like literally like crying on a bed because I wanted something. It came.
Wait, what year is this?
2003.
I mean, you had a cell phone, or we're talking about you're waiting on a landline?
I believe it might have. You know what? I don't even recall. It could have been a cell phone. I'm
going to pretend it was like either a landline or a really cinematic, what is now a cinematic flip phone. Like,
it could have been a flip phone.
Right.
A giant one.
Crying on your flip phone.
Well, I was like on a bed, like crying, like tears. You know, the room is dark.
Like legit wet?
Yeah, okay. Because I was like, look, I mean,
I've had them at work.
I didn't even have work to cry at. But I was like, I had to go back to the restaurant. I had to go back to asking people, like, do you want fries with that? A literal phrase I had to learn to work at this place. And, like, you know, the phone call finally comes in, and I'm like, oh, why are they calling? And she just starts saying how, like, look, this was, like, a really tough process. There was a lot of good applicants, and, you know, it's not easy to make this thing. And I'm just like, why are you dragging this shit out? Why the fuck are you even calling me?
Right.
Like, and then she goes, like, so can you start tomorrow? I was like, what? And they apparently liked the idea of like hiring someone with no skills but had like moxie. And
right.
as much as I was in this narrative idea that the job was so great, they also had this romantic idea of like, we can train people to do this kind of like work, and it's not reserved for like elitist kids or anything. Although they did hire a couple of those
right.
also. Like I was like the offset. Like they hired like I think 3 or 4 people at the same time. A couple of them were like award-winning college journalists, and then there was me.
Right. I mean, that's a really great story. How many people that you know come out of the Tribune? I only know you and Christina Carrega.
There's a guy at the Washington Post who's now at the Washington Post named Reed Albergotti. He was the other guy that got hired. He was one of the other guys that got hired around the same time as me.
Was he from Queens as well?
No, he was from California. So he had this like outdoor surfer attitude kind of thing, and I was like, yeah, you blend.
All right.
Angela Montefinis, who reported for the New York Post, was an investigative reporter there. She came out of Queens.
I mean, Queens is so big. Like, David Brand was here, and it's
Yeah.
just, there's so much. You don't even realize, like, we were talking about in one second Elmhurst, and the next second Long Island City, and in the next, you know, and you just realize it's almost like they're not just separate neighborhoods, they're separate worlds.
Yeah, if people always say this just by the numbers, if Queens was its own city, if Brooklyn was its own city, it's more than 2 million people. It's the 4th or 5th largest city in the country, but people don't think of it as a city within a city, in part because there's no municipal infrastructure that is that's on par with that kind of reality. Borough presidents are not the mayors of their borough. Like they don't have the kind of influence or deep-rooted sway about how things operate like that. Even the local elected officials, like the Democratic Party leaders, the Democratic county leader in Queens, does not have that same type of sway or influence or connectedness, arguably, that you would think the highest elected official of a 2 million person municipality would. And all that stuff gets eroded and broken down with social media, more internet connectivity, to the point where we get to today that every individual is like super empowered if they have like a large social following, social media following. Like if you have 5 reporters covering a city of 2 million, that's ridiculous, right? But we ask local papers to do that, and you know it's tough.
Just thinking about Queens alone. I was reading about Willets Point, and then I'm reading about the expansion in Long Island City.
Man. And again, like talk about amazing parts of Queens that if that existed in any other city, you would look at it and go like, why is this not a national story?
Right.
It's a place where people like basically car repair shops, basically housed in tin sheds, essentially, in unpaved roads behind a multi-million-dollar baseball stadium, right?
It's just it's shed after shed. It's almost like this amazing like milieu of just broken tires and twisted metal, and like it's the Wild West behind the stadium
in the middle of the borough, and it is a place where people are literally making a life for themselves by their own hands. There's no paved roads. I don't know how electricity gets in or out.
Plumbing is only so.
I'm not even sure. There's
not city plumbing, but I know that a couple of them have.
So it's rigged. A city that like it's a neighborhood that people have literally made by hand, with the city not helping, in part because they want this to sort of leave so they can like redevelop the land, and it's like very complicated to do it. But it's happening not far away. It's happening like actually in the middle of everything else, and it's like, how did this get here? Why is it like this? How come no one can agree on how to improve the area and what improvement is? Is it keeping the businesses there, or is it building housing? And everyone in the city says more housing is needed, but for who and how do you fund it and all that stuff?
This is what I wondered when I did the documentary about Fulton Fish Market. Like, I get that the facilities downtown by the Fulton Fish Market were not great. There were all these stalls in kind of rotting wooden buildings.
That's what gave it its charm.
Right, I thought so. But why not just like develop like some of those buildings? Now there's still very little being done over there, if anything. Why not just kind of update not the old pre-war kind of shack buildings, but on the other side? And I remember Bloomberg's answer to the question was just, he refused to even address the question. He goes, well, these facilities are not good enough, so we're moving everyone to the Bronx and to a clean, refrigerated facility in Hunts Point. But why not just make that facility right where it was, or shaped differently? And, that's when I first really started understanding how people would just push out working class jobs. Like, I didn't really get it before, but these guys who did the fish market, they're not guys and women and working people. They're not allowed to be around when things get fancy.
Yeah, it is amazing how the history of a location, its value, and why people made decisions can very easily be forgotten in a short period of time. And if there's not a good, vibrant newspaper or news consumption, which often feeds into like a civic life, a lot of things can be forgotten. And somebody once said architecture is a conversation between generations. And you could look at a building.
Oh, that's a good quote.
I stole it from someone, and I'm too dumb to remember who said it.
But it's so good. I want to say it every day.
No, it's great. And if you look at a building that is brick and symmetrical and might look nice, after hearing that quote, I would say, all right, who is that building talking to? It's talking to the one next to it. And if you see like a shiny glass building, the glass may look nice, but it looks really nice because it's reflecting the image of
that pretty brick, like old pre-war building.
And would you have built that glass building had there not been a brick one next to it to make it look kind of like an interesting contrast? And the city makes decisions, and generations later, other people have to like affirm or change that decision, and that happens all the time. And why do you keep a fish market downtown? Why do you move it? Why do you have a parking garage at the foot of the 59th Street Bridge? Why do you knock it down and build a glass tower there in its place? And you can make an argument, fewer cars are driving in, you want to encourage something else, mass transit. But at some point there was a need for parking, and they thought building a garage was a smart idea. Right. And then generations later, they're like, hey,
we don't want that.
We don't want it. But like, why people do things, like if you don't have a sense of the history and there's not journalists there who can write clearly and have their archives be easily accessible like it is here. Like I remember I grew up in Queens near the Clearview Expressway, and the first neighbor, the neighbor in the house next door when my family moved in, had been there for like a very long time, and he remembers when the quote unquote earth movers came in to dig out the Clearview.
What are the earth movers?
Like big machines.
Oh, they're not like a group. They're not like a cult.
No.
The earth movers. Okay.
Well, it was people employed by Robert Moses.
Right.
So
I mean,
it may qualify as that also. But like they refer to it as these giant things that literally moved Earth. And growing up there, I just knew that there was this there were there was like 8 lanes of an expressway 50, 100 feet below street level. And I just thought, oh, Mother Nature's weird. It made this weird thing.
Right.
And like, no, people came in and moved it. And it was my neighbor that had to tell me. Because a bunch of residents fought successfully Robert Moses and had it stop so it didn't extend further. So there's reason.
So there's like a Jane Jacobs of Queens somewhere.
Yeah.
Forcing a road to end.
It's funny that like we could be born into a city and look around at the most unnatural landscape in the world. Buildings, streets, curbs, and just not question the decisions that led to it, or just assume that we knew what it was. But there's a reason why the Cleaver Expressway starts where it starts and ends where it ends. And there's a reason why there's not mass transit, that goes down to JFK very easily. And there's a reason why, if you look at a subway map, the neighborhood where I grew up is literally behind the Legend, where it's not even like you can find it, and everything is on one side of the city and not the other. There's decisions that went into how the city looks, even the shape of Manhattan. Like Battery Park City, is like a man-made thing because people went up into the air. In order to go up, they had to build down and like take out dirt and throw it somewhere. So
I've started the Power Broker 5 times, and I've always fallen asleep like at page 20 because I've always started it late at night. And
that's good.
Just like late at night, I'm like, this is a good time to start this. And it's like, no, a good time to start it is when I'm coffeeed up and have nothing to do.
Well, I mean, coffeed up is always a good thing.
Yeah.
But the Power Broker is like, so
Robert Moses' story, for any listeners who are still listening who have no idea what that is, it's the Robert Moses' biography, or
it's a biography of Robert Moses by a guy named Robert Caro. And it's sort of fascinating. Robert Moses built a lot of New York City. He was an architect, not trained. He never learned to drive. He never had an engineering degree, but he built and engineered a lot of stuff. And he built large, magnificent structures, in part, arguably, as monuments to his own greatness. He wanted them to be big, and he wanted them to...
who among us?
Right. He wanted them to be big. He wanted them to be forever. And he, for many years, had this unquestionable reputation of being the good guy. And that solid reputation allowed him to do all these like things that people just didn't even question or even look at. It was his good guy reputation that gave him power, that enabled him to do a lot of stuff, including acquire money, which gave him a different kind of power. But he was unquestioned, and he built large-scale things that would last forever. Well, the person who wrote this biography of him, it's 1,300 pages. He's considered one of the greatest journalists and historians alive. He writes large things that presumably are lasting forever.
That are like definitive.
And his reporting goes unquestioned. And you could almost see how he, in some ways, is not unlike the person he wrote and taught everyone to question. It's just interesting how we can all like fawn and be so deferential and be awe-inspired at every utterance of Robert Caro, and how that is exactly the type of atmosphere that allowed somebody else to go in and do things.
Type of admiration.
It was a type of admiration, and unquestioned admiration.
Yeah, it wasn't the book's fault I fell asleep. It was entirely my own. All right, well, we're coming to an end because I have to go home. Because
I was over an hour late.
I didn't want to say it, but I have to go home because I'm supposed to go to the movies with a very kind boyfriend who has been very patient while we've been constructing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Talk about don't bury the lead.
I know.
Boyfriend, you have a date tonight. I'm ruining it.
No, you're not ruining it because he's a good boyfriend and he understands the need to exist on a cardboard child set so that I can interview my friends on YouTube. So leave us with the thought of the day. I just made that up.
Oh, man.
The news of the day. Leave us with one news item of the day that we should read about tomorrow morning.
Can I answer that first one? Thought of the day is like, don't have a thought of the day. Like, have a thought for like a year. Like, things move like really fast, and like, what's the harm of like taking your time to like think beyond your immediate? Like, I know we all do daily stories, and I wrote something that somebody put a headline on saying like why I give up daily journalism and stuff. But like think longer, think deeper, think forward and backwards. Like don't just think of like the day, because that's where if you're just looking at the feet in front of you, like you don't see what's coming up ahead.
Forest trees losing the arc for the plot.
Basically. Anyway, you have a movie to go see.
I have a movie, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for letting me babble.
All right. Well, how's the coffee?
Cheers.
Good.